Hello everyone, my name is Arnab Dey, and today I'll be presenting our research on the weekly supervised classification of respiratory rate vital sign alerts as real or artifact. So the biggest motivation behind this research is to combat alarm fatigue. Now, research has found that a large percentage of clinical alarms are false. Now, this combined with the fact that healthcare professionals could be exposed to up to 1,000 alarms per shift results in alarm desensitization in medical practitioners, which then leads to true instability in patients getting missed. Now, in addition to this, what can also happen is that the constant beeping of the alerts can lead to physiological stress in the patient, as well as metabolic impairment, sleep disturbance, and potentially even death, as the FDA has reported 500 alarm-related patient deaths in 5 years. So the basic level zero solution, as I like to call it, is simply manual analysis every time the alarm beeps. So this is not really a solution because this is precisely what is contributing to alarm fatigue. And it's very impractical, especially for real-time analysis. So the next level up is to implement a supervised learning classifier. Now this is a lot more practical and efficient than manual analysis, but it still requires that initial investment of time, money, and effort to acquire those manually annotated ground truth labels. So the second motivation behind this research is flexibility and efficiency. Now, I've already said that manual annotation is expensive, but it's also potentially unnecessary. In addition, supervised learning pipelines also do not easily adapt to changing problem definitions. Now, what I mean by this is that, let's say, instead of respiratory rate alerts, we want to now look at oxygen saturation alerts. Now, this means that we're going to have to acquire those ground truth labels again. We cannot reuse any of the previous ones for respiratory rate alerts. And so it's not very flexible. So what's the solution for this? The next step up is weak supervision or data programming. And data programming requires virtually zero labeled data. And it's also easily scalable and adaptable to new problems because it relies on multiple sources or multiple noisy heuristics as the source for the weak supervisory signal. Now, what this means is that these labeling functions that it uses, if you have some labeling functions that can be reused between, let's say, respiratory rate and oxygen saturation rate alerts, if you have some heuristics in common, then they can be reused. And it's very cheap and easy as compared to other traditional machine learning pipelines. So what is the weak supervision pipeline? It's twofold. The first path is you go to a domain expert, in this case a doctor, you consult them and they'll give you a set of business rules or heuristics that you then translate into these labeling functions or code. Then you feed this code into a generative model and it outputs probabilistic labels that your downstream classifier, which in this case is a random forest classifier, that it can use those probabilistic labels. And then you also feed in your alert info, you unpack it, featureize it, etc. And then you train and test your model. So the data was collected from a Philips monitor in ICU and SDU patients. There were a total of 216 respiratory rate alert in total, but we took the first 3 minutes and then split it into 1 minute windows to get a total of 648 respiratory rate alert windows. And then we used leave one group out cross-validation, in which the group would be the patient. And you can see we analyzed a variety of numerics and waveforms that you can see over there. So this is a sample labeling function here at the top, and at the bottom you can see a series of 8 labeling functions that were used and a set of summary statistics on them. Now our research can be neatly summarized in these plots called receiver operating characteristic plots, and you can see that we analyzed 3 different pipelines. So we looked at the weak supervision pipeline, we looked at a baseline model, the majority vote model, in which the label of the alert was based on what the majority of the labeling functions voted. And then we have your traditional fully supervised learning model. Now, based on the plots and the actual metrics of performance, you can tell that the weak supervision pipeline actually outperformed the fully supervised pipeline. And the majority vote baseline model, which also relies on heuristics, performs similarly to the supervised learning pipeline as well. Now, this is very interesting because the weak supervision pipeline outperformed the supervised learning pipeline without any access to ground truth labels. And eventually, these models can be used to reduce alarm fatigue in the ICU, as well as review archive data in a manner similar to a fact checker of sorts. Now, in future work, we plan to look at classifying SpO2 alerts, which is oxygen saturation, as well as exploiting the rich time series featurizations of waveform data using ResNet as the downstream classifier instead of random forest models. And we'll also look at some ablation experiments in which we remove or hold out the waveform data just so we can see the importance of it. And then we'll compare weak supervision to other pipelines such as active learning or federated learning or other learning paradigms. I just want to take a minute to thank all of the risk sponsors, and I would also like to thank my mentors, Mononito and Dr. Dabrowski, for their tremendous efforts and help and support throughout this summer. And yeah, thank you all for listening as well.